Welcome to today's webinar, Reflections of Remote Work During COVID-19, a Regional Perspective. This webinar is made possible by the Maryland Department of Transportation's Commuter Choice Maryland program. My name is Gladys Hurwitz. I'm the Multimodal Transportation Specialist at the Maryland Department of Transportation. This session is being recorded. Here's some quick webinar FAQs to keep in mind. Make sure that you chose either the computer or phone for your audio preference. Use the question window to ask us questions. We also have time dedicated for question and answers after the presentation. The recording of this session will be available along with slide decks on our website, commuterchoicemaryland.com. For the first time in our nation's history, we are facing a pandemic that has forced many organizations and businesses to quickly plan for remote work, to adjust their existing remote work plans and policies to accommodate for remote work full-time. Many Maryland agencies and companies were able to easily shift to remote work while the state mandated stay-at-home orders, which has given employers and employees the opportunity to quickly adapt their workplace policies and learn how to be productive in a virtual work environment. These webinars we put together to provide you with support that you need during these difficult times, learn from business leaders on best practices, and provide you with inspiration for your workplace or business to put in motion. Also, knowing what resources are available will help you quickly adjust and prepare for what the future may bring. Commuter Choice Maryland is the Maryland Department of Transportation's demand management program that promotes alternatives to driving alone, such as remote work, public transportation, ride sharing or carpooling, van pooling, walking, biking, and flexible work schedules. All of these options are important because they help Maryland reduce congestion, conserve energy, protect the environment, and protect the quality of life for all Marylanders. Commuter Choice Maryland also provides resources for commuters to help them determine the best commute option that suits their needs. Our website serves as a centralized resource for commuters who may need information on transportation options, along with other valuable resources, such as how to connect with a Maryland rideshare rep, information on guaranteed ride home, and how to find the best commute that works for you. Employer program services include information on how to get a commuter benefits program started, or how to expand an existing commuter program. Marketing materials are also available for download to help your employees with commute options. We also provide technical assistance to participating employers who need help with commuter benefits, such as the Maryland Commuter Tax Credit and Transportation Fringe Benefits. Our new commuter calculator helps you determine the best commute option for you and includes information on how much money you can save on gas, vehicle maintenance costs, and parking cost savings. Business toolkits have been developed to help businesses in Maryland who are thinking about starting up a van pool, telework program, or a commuter benefits program. All of these are available on our website, commuterchoicemaryland.com. These weekly Lunch and Learn webinars are a special series for May. Webinars are usually offered on a quarterly basis. Past topics have included how to implement commuter options, getting started with commuter benefits, and how to have a bike and walk friendly workplace. All webinar recordings are available on our website, commuterchoicemaryland.com. Now we'd like to go ahead and give you guys a poll on which topics would be of interest to you for the future. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So maybe some topics that you would like to see us cover would be how to plan and implement a commuter benefits program. Maybe you'd like to see more best practices from Maryland businesses. Perhaps seeing more sessions on business tax credits would be of most interest to you. or maybe you'd like to learn more about the available toolkits and how to use them. If you have any other suggestions, please feel free to go ahead and email us or input that into the message box, and we'll make sure to go ahead and take that into consideration. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys 2 more seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share the results with you all. So it looks like the majority of you would like to see more sessions on best practices, followed by how to implement a commuter benefits program, and then coming in 3rd place is how to use available toolkits. So the other categories actually is a little bit higher than our previous sessions at 9%. I think last time it was about 5%. So please make sure to get in contact with us about some of your other ideas. We'd really appreciate that. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest, Mr. Nicholas Ramphos. Ramphos is currently the Transportation Operations Programs Director with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments in Washington, D.C., and is responsible for the development, implementation, and evaluation of regional transportation demand management programs through Commuter Connections and the implementation of Job Access Reverse Commute, New Freedom, Enhanced Mobility. He was also responsible for state rail safety oversight programs in Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the District of Columbia, and managed the formation of the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission. Ramphos has been a transportation demand management practitioner with over 30 years of program development and implementation at various metropolitan planning organizations. He has developed and implemented various commute alternative programs and policies in the Washington, D.C., San Diego, Detroit, and Chicago regional markets. Many of the projects have addressed congestion, air quality, energy efficiency, and sustainability issues. Ramphos has also implemented commuter transportation marketing campaigns through traditional media and social marketing, and is a Purdue University graduate. Thank you for joining us today, Nick.
Thanks, Gladys. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be here, and wanted to give everybody some background information. I appreciate the introduction. And so today I'm going to be talking to you about teleworking and flex work in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. And I would give you a little bit of background, if we can go to the next slide. On Commuter Connections, we are a network of public and private transportation organizations in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. And essentially, we work to encourage commuters in the region to use alternatives to the single occupant vehicle. And we do have a strategic plan that outlines a lot of what we do in order to work with those individuals as well as with businesses and organizations in the region. Next slide. Our program services are designated in what's called an air quality non-attainment area, and that includes the District of Columbia, and then in Maryland, it's Charles, Calvert, Frederick, Montgomery, and Prince George's counties. And then in Virginia, that includes the City of Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, and excuse me, and Prince William counties. So our program focus areas really provide eligibility for commuters to participate in our programs in those designated jurisdictions. So as long as you're working in one of those particular jurisdictions, you are eligible to basically take part in our various commuter program services that we offer. Next slide. So some of those program areas include our long-standing operations center. We provided ride matching coordination since 1974, back when the energy crisis first started. And we provide general transportation information to the public. We also operate a regional guaranteed ride home program. We also do quite a bit of marketing, and we have some specialized programs such as Pool Rewards, Carpool Now, Flex Time Rewards, as well as Incentrip, which is a mobile app. And then we also put on the regional Bike to Work Day and Car Free Day events. Next slide. We also work with employers through an employer services program. We coordinate a regional database. We also provide bicycling outreach to employers, and then we provide administrative support to all of our local jurisdictions in providing collateral materials, some training, case studies, as well as telework, which I'll be focusing in on today. And then we do a lot of monitoring and evaluation of those programs so that we can estimate the impacts of the program both on our transportation and air quality for the region. Next slide. There are benefits to the program that have been documented for jurisdictions, employers, and workers. Essentially, we help reduce and manage commuter congestion. We help reduce emissions. We help support local efforts to attract and retain employers. For employers, a lot of these programs help with recruitment and retention efforts. And then for the workers themselves, we do provide commute options as well as reduced stress and the cost it takes to commute to and from work, as well as the time. And then overall, we also can document improved quality of life. Next slide. So our first poll is whether or not you're familiar with the State of the Commute Survey that the region conducts. And I guess we'll give it about another few seconds. Okay, and it looks like, I can't quite see the percentage, but it looks like most folks are familiar with the State of the Commute, and there's some folks that are somewhat familiar with it, which is good. So with that, I'm just going to give you a quick background on that survey. It's a survey we conduct every 3 years. We started conducting that survey back in 2001. And essentially, it allows us to analyze our commute trends and attitudes and traffic patterns, as well as the effectiveness of our overall, all of our programs. And it's a random sample survey. We use an address-based sampling methodology, and we focus primarily on the commute trips and modes only. So we're not focusing on all travel. It's just that commute trip. Next slide. And this past survey that we did in 2019, we interviewed about 8,200 employed workers in the region. Confidence level of the survey is 95% plus or minus 1%. And again, it was a randomly selected survey where we mailed out postcards to addresses with a link to an internet survey. And then we also did some surveys by phone, although phone surveys are pretty difficult to coordinate these days, just because a lot of folks don't answer their phone, or they have answering machines, or it's just difficult to get people over the phone. So we had a lot more success with getting folks through the mail, through a postcard, and then onto the internet. We ensured that we had at least 600 completes in each of our jurisdictions in our non-attainment area. Next slide. And one of the other things we do is we collect a lot of data on teleworking. So we know the number of teleworkers, the frequency of how often they telework, what is the potential for additional teleworkers to come on board. We look at teleworkers by employer type, as well as what type of an arrangement they have. So I'm going to cover some of those statistics over the next few slides. So if you want to go to the next slide. And we have a poll. So since 2004, do you think that telework has stayed the same, doubled, or tripled in number? Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. Okay. So most of you said that it's doubled or tripled. So if I could just show you that. So essentially, it has tripled since 2004. Currently, 35% of regional commuters teleworked at least occasionally in 2019. And as you could see, we've added almost 200,000 new teleworkers for over 1 million teleworkers. So back in 2016, we had about 877,000 teleworkers, and now we're over 1 million. Next slide. So nearly almost 60% of the respondents said that they teleworked at least 1 day a week. And on average, teleworkers use this arrangement a little over a day a week, so about 1.2 days a week. So as you can see, that number's relatively stayed the same since 2013. It's close to 60%. Next slide. And then when we look at actual work schedule arrangements compared to 2016, we have more self-employed individuals. The average assigned weekdays are about the same. Average travel days are about the same. We have less people doing compressed work schedules. Actually, we have more people, I'm sorry, it's the opposite. We have more people doing work compressed schedules. And more people teleworking. It went up, from 32% to 35%. And then the average telework frequency is about the same. It's 1.2 versus 1.4 back in 2016. Next slide. And then we looked at employers by telework type, and federal agencies tend to have the most telework going on. It's a lot higher than the regional average, and then even higher than individuals that work for nonprofit employers or even private sector employers, and even state and local agencies. But as you can see with federal agencies, that has been going up. And back in 2010, there was a Telework Enhancements Act that was passed by Congress, so that really gave the impetus to federal agencies to increase their teleworking. State and local agencies kind of lag behind everyone else. Private sector, we saw a little bit of a drop back when there was a recession, and some of that is coming back, but it used to be a lot stronger than what it is right now, or what it was. Right now, it is pretty strong, just given the pandemic. But when we did the survey, it wasn't as high as the federal agencies. Next slide. And we also looked at non-teleworkers, and these are people who said, hey, I'm not a teleworker, but I have a telework appropriate job, and I work at home at least once this past year, and that could have been for any type of reason. It could have been a snowstorm, it could have been for whatever, something could have been happening. There could have been a traffic issue. So that represented a little over 20% of all commuters. And when we look at the federal workers who said they didn't telework, almost 70% of them worked from home at least a day in the past year. So if you add that into the other folks who are typically teleworking, we estimated that there's probably around 272,000 teleworkers per each workday. And obviously that's different right now because of the pandemic, but based on our survey in normal times and normal working times up, that's the number that we would get. Next slide. So we have another poll here. If you could just take a look at this in terms of whether your office had a telework arrangement in place prior to the pandemic. we'll give that another couple seconds. Okay, looks like most people had a formal telework program in place, and some of you had an informal telework program in place, and then there were a few folks who did not offer remote work. Okay, so when we looked at the telework arrangements from the survey, a little over 60% said that their employers allow some telework under either a formal program or an informal arrangement. And that's gone up both on the formal side as well as the informal side, even going back to 2013. Next slide. So when we look at these arrangements by employer type, again, federal government agencies tend to have higher percentages of formal programs. Nonprofits and private employers seem to have a little bit more of informal arrangements. And then just about all of them had pretty high percentages of allowing for telework, except for state and local agencies. Those organizations really didn't have those types of arrangements or didn't have any type of a program. And a lot of that could be because it could be law enforcement or it could be educators, that type of thing. Next slide, please. So we've had a pretty long history with telework going back to the mid-1990s. We did have a resource center that was set up, and we provided a lot of training for employers, commuter outreach to individuals that were interested in telework. GSA used to have telework centers. A lot of those have been converted, or they've either closed down or they've been converted to co-working centers. And we've also developed many case studies over the years on successful telework programs. And back in 2018, we had a new initiative that really was kind of a offspring of our Visualize 2045 regional transportation plan. There were some aspirational initiatives. And that initiative really looked to help small and mid-sized employers implement either a flex time or telework program at their workplace. So we had a work group that got together to put together some resources for that. And then right when we were putting the final touches on it, the coronavirus pandemic hit. And so those resources are really available for any employer. But it was, the timing was, it wasn't, it was just coincidental that all of that occurred, but we do have those resources up on our website now. So and I'm going to cover some of that just to let folks know what we have. Next slide. So we have, this is the link to the website. We have a ready-to-use workplace poster. You could use it on your intranet if you have one. We have some sample telework program guidelines as well as a sample telework agreement. We have a lot of do's and don'ts for managers as well as the employees themselves. We've updated all of those co-working centers and shared workspaces. And then there's also a self-help guide that we've put together for employees seeking to telework. And then there's also an overview of those centers that are available out in the marketplace. So if you go to that link, you'll see all of this information under the employer section. Next slide. And then we also have information on alternative work schedules, same type of thing. We have program agreements and some tips on do's and don'ts for both managers and employees. Next slide. We also advertised this during the pandemic. We had a campaign running from March to about mid-April. We got a lot of hits on the website. This was really one of our top 5 locations where a lot of folks were looking at that information. So where do we head from now? Next slide. We are going to be surveying employers in the region, and we want to know how they've used telework during the pandemic. And then we also want to see what possible ongoing telework may happen in the future. So we're getting ready to launch that survey in about a week or so. We want to find out, just because a lot of employers who may not have had a program, they may have had to do what I'm calling forced telework because of the pandemic. And so we want to find out what was the use of telework prior to the shutdown. How do they use telework to maintain their operations during the shutdown? And then how do they rate the success of the program? So things like worker productivity, employee satisfaction, communications, and I'm sure that many of you are probably looking at this right now. What are some of the challenges that you've encountered, whether it was technology, policies, supervision, making sure folks had enough work? And then some people tend to overwork when they're at home, and so they're putting in long hours. What is the expected planned continuation of these programs as we start opening up the region? And then what types of resources did they use in order to get information to basically put that program together? Next slide. And I'm sure many of you are thinking about the reopening, and commuting definitely is going to be a challenge once the region does reopen, and employers may need to consider alternatives. And some of the things that employers are going to be looking at are going to include company car allowances, potentially private bus services, what we call proximate commuting, or leasing smaller office space or co-working center space in locations that are closer to the workers' home so that they don't have to travel. Leasing of cars and vans for company provided carpools and van pools based on their home locations. Of course, teleworking is going to play a major component in this, because a lot of companies, if they see that this is working, they're probably going to say, hey, we did well with this, so we're going to continue with this. And in the end, it could save on a lot of overhead dollars. I've seen employers in the past where they've basically shut down locations and they've consolidated, and they went to a hoteling type of an environment. And if you had a meeting or you had to meet a client, you basically could go to that office, but otherwise you were essentially working from home. Other things that employers are going to be looking at are going to be staggered work hours or days as we're reopening, so that not everyone is in the office at the same time. Compressed work weeks and flex time, those are going to be alternative work schedules that will be highly used. And then other components would be bicycling, e-scooter, and walking incentives that employers may want to offer, particularly for those employees that live closer in to those office locations. So that concludes my presentation, and more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nick. That was a really informative presentation. We really appreciate it. So if the folks out there are listening in and watching the session, feel free to go ahead and input some questions that you have. And we actually have some questions that folks sent in early, so we can go ahead and get started. So Nick, news articles these past several weeks have shared that many large corporations are considering a permanent transition to more remote work. Do you anticipate other employers in our region will also make the move to embrace remote work more at post-COVID-19?
I do. I think it's something that, particularly if you're an employer who maybe had a group of folks who were teleworking occasionally, or maybe a particular department that was teleworking. Now that this has been happening over the course of the last 2 months, and if it's working well, I think a lot of employers are going to see this as a win, and they're just and if productivity levels are at the at where they need to be, I think a lot of the employers are just going to say, hey, we're going to just stay with this. And so yeah, I fully expect that there's going to be increased remote working going on, even as the region starts to reopen. And it may be situations where employees don't feel comfortable coming back to the work site. It could be individuals who may have underlying health conditions and they just don't want to expose themselves, getting onto a bus or a train or in a carpool or a van pool or driving, and then coming into a work site where they don't know if they're going to be vulnerable to catching the virus. There could be a number of reasons. I think there will be certainly a set of people who are going to say, yep, I'm going back to the office because this isn't working for me. So I think there's definitely going to be some increases there. Absolutely.
Great. So there are a couple questions rolling in here regarding your telework survey. Can you talk a little bit about when you plan to launch it and how long it will take you to publish the results of that survey?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Originally, we were going to launch the survey in March, and all of this started unfolding, and so we decided just to hold off. And it wasn't a survey about the pandemic itself. This is a survey that we typically do every 3 years. We do survey employers about telework. So again, coincidental, this all happened. So we decided to expand the survey questionnaire to include questions about the pandemic and all of the basically the topics I covered. So we're planning to launch that survey in the next week or so. We're in the final testing period. And what'll happen is we'll collect data through about mid-June, and then we should have some highlights and results by the end of June, which is the end of our fiscal year. And then we'll have a nice write-up that'll be provided probably in early to mid-July, I would say.
Great. And you might have highlighted this a bit earlier, but can you also share regarding the telework survey who the audience will be for that?
Yeah, so it's any employer in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region that we work with, or if we have, there are some jurisdictions who have lists of employers that they would like us to survey, and so we will reach out to those employers as well. We also will be surveying all of the federal government agencies as well. So.
Okay, great. Nick, you've really shared a bunch of resources that your organization shares on the regular on your website. What else, or how else is your organization planning to help commuters or for post-COVID-19?
Yeah, so that last slide I showed, there are many different options there for employers. One of the things that we also want to do is make sure that we're messaging commuters and giving them recommendations on any issues that may arise with use of public transportation and getting into carpools, van pools. We do have a working group that we're setting up to take a look at all of those issues and then come up with some very specific guidelines and recommendations to commuters in the region. So we're hoping to have that out, I'd say by mid-June, so that it'll really help with the reopening of our region.
Okay, great. So that's all the time that we have today for questions. Thank you again, Nick. Really appreciate your time today.
Okay.
All right, so thank you for attending today's webinar. Registration is now open on our website for our next session on May 21st, where we will hear from our guest speaker, Ms. Peggy Yusko from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. As always, we're always ready to assist with your commuter needs. Our office remains virtually open during this pandemic, so please feel free to call us and leave a voicemail or email if you have any questions or need assistance. Lastly, be sure to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we will make sure to follow back. Take care.